So first, I will be again reviewing what the web is and HTTP and going through some details of this tool. And then how do we do web API, especially when it comes to implementing CRUD operation, create, update, delete operations. So first of all, based on your experience so far, how can we define a web API? What is a web API? The keyword here is this keyword. Programmatic access. Web API allows programmatic access to resources or to applications. If developers, we have to be familiar that the web, we are not the only people on the web, by the way. We're not only humans these days are on the web. The web has two major parts, if you want to think very kind of deeply. The web has two major parts. One part for the humans. This is where you have HTML pages and PDFs and videos and images. This is the human web. You need some human, they go to Mr. Google, they ask for some keywords, they get URLs and they click on these URLs and keep on spending the whole night navigating from one URL to another. That's one part of the web. And that's where the HTML, CSS comes in to provide a good user interface and good user experience. The other part of the web is the programmable web. The programmable web. And this programmable web, basically we have web API. And this web API can be consumed and can be used programmatically by other programs. Is this clear? So web API is basically, I make my resources or my functionality or my content programmatically accessible. And this is very, very powerful idea. And we need to be aware of it because most of what we're using on the web, like for example, Google search, if we want to search for something, let's say Qatar University. Yes? Because these results are structured for to visualize it for human consumption, not for other programs. So luckily, all major platforms, so if I go here and say Google search web API, everything you can do using the Google search, you can do it using the web API. What I want to say here, when you build your web application, you must think. It's not only the humans are there. There are some parts of your application could be useful for other applications. So what you do, you expose them through web API. Web API, you take any application, let's say Facebook or Twitter or Google search. You can write a program that does the search. Let me give you a small scenario. Let's say I am QU, let's say marketing manager, and I want to know any article that will come out on the web that has the keyword QU. So I'm not going to employ somebody every 5 minutes typing in Google and see if there is a new search results. It will be crazy. Okay, and I have to have 3 shifts, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. Instead, I write a little program that uses Google Search API, little program, and search every 5 minutes. Before it was free with some limits, now you have to pay. But it's small fee. You get the result, you get the idea. The same thing for Facebook. Let's say you want to post a message, you want to get friends of friends, whatever you want to do, whatever we do on the user interface, you can do it through the programmatic interface. Let me say one more word. And this is becoming very, very fashionable and very important because in most web applications, they have multiple user interfaces. They might have a mobile interface, they might have a web interface, they might have even desktop interface. And all of them, regardless of which channel, which interface you use, they access the same functionality. How this is possible? By using web API. You get the idea. So it's much deeper. So I don't want you to stay on the surface. I'm just creating a little web API to make it accessible. You are basically allowing applications to talk to each other remotely without knowing anything about their programming language, about where they are, who created them. You need to know nothing. just the URL. And you use HTTP protocol to communicate with this web API. So all major platforms that we are using every day has a web API. Amazon, Twitter, PayPal, and you name it, all of them have web API. In fact, even Blackboard has web API. Okay? So for example, let's say we have in QU or in many universities, the student details and the student registrations and so on are usually managed by Banner. Banner is where all the information is. Now, after as the students register, the Banner will basically communicate that information to Blackboard, for example. It can be done using Web API. So whenever new students are added to the class, it gets added to Blackboard, for example. This is just an example. So for application to application integration or application to application interaction, these days the way we do it is through Web API. And it's so powerful because it is platform independent, language independent, as long as the programming platform you are using knows how to interact with it using HTTP, you are ready, which is the case for all languages. Is this clear? Yes, please, you had a question?
Are these all APIs using the same notation as JSON? Or
good question, good question. Basically, in the old web, in the few years ago, like around 2000 and so, this idea of Web API and web services, another name for it is web services, became so popular. And at that time, people were using what a data format called XML, okay? And in fact, they were called XML web services. And basically, if those of you not familiar with XML, so something like this. So for example, if you want to represent a student's object, you might represent it this way. Here is a student. Yes, a tag. You open the tag, you close the tag, and then you put the properties of the student. Here is, for example, ID, 1, 2, 3, and you close the tag. Yeah. First name, you put the first name and you close the tag. You get the idea, yes? So this is an old format, still kind of used, but if you use this format, people will know you are in previous generation. This kind of, for new applications, nobody is using XML. So this was replaced by JSON, yeah? So there were many attempts before this, by the way, many attempts before this. It was hard to get applications written in different languages, running on different platforms to interact. But with Web API and HTTP as the protocol of communication, this became much easier than before. Any other questions? So what is the key word here when we talk about API? What do we use API for? To allow programmatic access to our web, to our functionality, to our resources. And not only this, we can do it from a range of clients. In both, we have flexibility in terms of implementation, and we have flexibility in terms of clients. Both of them, most languages have full support of this. But JavaScript is super excellent because from day one, it is built with this in mind. Okay, so now that we understand this, let us just quickly review these two important technologies. So we already defined what the web is, and what did we, at the end of the day, concluded?
Web is made up of the programmatic access, the APIs, and the presentation.
Yes, both of those we can call them resources. Whether it is an HTML page, whether it is a JSON document, whether it is a web API, let's say giving us books or giving us accounts, whether it is an image or a video or a PDF file, what is the generic umbrella under which we can put all those? Resources. So what is the web at the end of the day? set of resources. And then what's the second concept when we know that a web API is, the web is made up of resources? These resources have unique addresses. Unique addresses. So each resource on the web, whether it is a web API or an image or a static page or a dynamic page, at the end of the day, all of the web API, all the web resources have an address. Okay? So the web is made up of resources. Each resource has a unique address. And then what's the third element of the story? How do we access these resources? Request response, this is the architecture of the web. The web, the architecture, the way it is organized, we have two major components. We have the client that generates requests and sends them using HTTP to the server, and the server is another component that generates the response. That's the architecture. So the client-server, request-response architecture. But in terms of concepts, three major concepts you have to keep in mind. The web is made up of resources. Each resource has a unique address, which is the URL. And the third concept is we access these resources using HTTP. Yeah? So as a web developer, we cannot call ourselves web developers if we are not familiar with HTTP. It's a fundamental protocol. And as we saw when we are starting to do web API development, the concepts start to come to surface in the programming style and in the programming paradigm. So you need to understand, I don't want you to just do app.get, some string, comma, some function, but you should really understand what's going on. Yeah? Okay, so let us now spend a little bit of time on this HTTP protocol. So first of all, since we just said that the web is made up of resources, each resource has a unique address, and this address is usually in the form of a URL. Now the URL, or Uniform Resource Locator, it has a standard format. When I say standard, whenever you hear this word standard, know that some people took some day off, and luckily maybe they fly them off. There's some nice hotel, and they sat in some room like this, and then they debate. Sometimes things go well, sometimes there is some punching going on, and basically at the end of the day, they agree on something, they document it, they put it on the web, and they say, "Khalas, this is how you do it. We agree, don't bring your own ways. Stop it. Do what we agree upon." That is what standard means. Okay? Now, the URL has a standard format. You cannot come now in 21st century and start to have your own philosophy about URL. That's how the URL should look like. So how the URL should look like according to the standard? It starts with the protocol part. These days, the winner protocol by far is HTTP. HTTPS, that is more just for secure HTTP. Okay, so there is some establishing secure channel between the client and the server, where basically when you send the messages, they are encrypted. Even if somebody taps into the network and they intercept the messages, they cannot make sense of them. HTTP sends on plain text, but that's just a security channel. It's still HTTP. It's still HTTP. Yes, please.
Then why, I've seen it as well, but why then people are not using it since it's more secure?
No, heavily using it. But you don't for public information, you don't need to have it because the information is public. As soon as you start logging in or going to some sensitive information, it's there, of course. So anywhere, anytime, it could be HTTP. As soon as you go to a secure part that needs a login, it will ask you. If you see carefully, the address will change to HTTPS. But if it is public, there is no need. It's just a waste of time. Because don't forget, with HTTPS, there is nothing free in this world. The performance will degrade slightly, not too much, but it will degrade because there is encryption on the client side and the decryption on the server side. And there is some handshaking to establish that secure communication. But at the end of the day, it's still HTTP, is just secure HTTP. Okay, now, the URL, what are the parts of the URL? We have the protocol, :// followed by the host name, the name of the server. That's in this case, for example, q.edu.qa. Of course, this name will be translated by DNS to an IP address. If you can also replace the name with an IP address, it doesn't matter. Followed by : and then the port number. Of course, browsers, because port 80 is the common web server port, the browser does not, you don't need to add it, but even if you add it, the browser will remove it. Followed by / and followed by what? The path, the URL path. Now, what I mean, here you have reached this server, you have reached this port on the server, and this is the exact resource you want to get.
Okay, but now the question is that what is the use of port?
Okay, very good. The use of port. Anybody can explain what is the use of port, why it is very important?
About which application goes to which.
Very good, because basically, look, on the server, you might have, here is a server, you might have different apps running on that server. You might have a mail server, you might have a web server, you might have a print server, multiple servers. Now, when a message comes, what is the lucky service that will receive this message, depending on the port? So the port allows multiple applications to run on the same server and to use the same IP address. So when it comes, it's like when it comes, let's say when you get a letter from outside, they will say Qatar, Doha, Qatar. First it will come to Qatar, then from Qatar, Doha, it will come to Doha. From Doha, then it will go to the actual addresses, Duhail, or then it will be regions, then it will be the street, and so on. So first, when message comes, it will come to the server using the IP address. Once it arrives to the operating system of that server, the operating system will be saying, oh, which app should I send this message to? It will look at the port. And depending on the port, if it is 80, it is coming to the web server. If it is, I don't know, the mail server, whatever port, it will go to the mail server, and so on. So the port is very critical to have multi-services running on the same server, sharing the same network card and sharing the same IP address. Yeah? Okay, moving on. Now, when it comes to sending and receiving HTTP requests, again, there is a standard way. You cannot do it your own way. If you want to request a resource from a server, you cannot write the request the way you wish. There is a standard way you should follow. And that's what HTTP standard gives you. So for example, as I explained before, if you want to send a request for the index.html page, this is how the requests look like at the end of the day. It will have the verb, in this case get, because I'm just reading and retrieving the resource, followed by, what is this? The resource, or more precisely, the URL path, or the resource path, okay? Followed by the protocol name and version. New line, must be new line. You cannot have space or tab or 10 characters spacing, whatever. It must be new line. And in here you can put the host. This is the host name in the URL, host name. Followed by a new line, and you can put as many headers as you wish. There are many headers out there. I will show you some of them. One of them happens to be called user agent. What is user agent? Do you think? This is which client it's coming from. It could be Mozilla, it could be Firefox, it could be like Chrome, it could be like Safari, and so on. Each browser has its own unique user agent name. If you wish, you could tell the server, oh, by the way, I'm coming from Chrome Android. I'm coming from Chrome desktop version, whatever. Okay? And this could be very useful. In what sense? How this is useful? What the server will use this for? Yes.
It can serve you a more appropriate version of the website.
Very good. Yes.
Your device.
Yes. So it can give you like a custom version optimized for the device or the browser you are using. Okay. That's it. This is how the request look like. Because this is the GET request, you don't need the body, just the headers, just you can only include headers, there is no body. Now the response, this is how the server should respond. It should respond. The first line should be status code. It starts with, again, with the protocol and the version, and followed by status code. 200 OK, or 404 not found, or 301 moved, and so on. Yes, followed by, this is optional. This is the content length, how many characters in this body of the request. You can see here, you cannot put the body of the response, the body of the response cannot come here immediately after this line. It has to be in a new line, okay? So that's what HTTP protocol is. If you want to make a request, this is how you should format it, and the server, when the server responds, this is how it should be formatted. Now, as developers, we don't need to know all the headers or all the possible values, but we need to know the most common ones. We cannot, every time we have a conversation or a discussion or I'm developing, I have to ask Mr. Google, what are the HTTP verbs? For the fancy ones that we don't use much, it's fine, but the common one you should know. Get, post, put, delete, you should know. The common headers you should know. The common status code you should know. It's just like the minimum knowledge as a web developer you should be familiar. You should be familiar with the concepts and those common ones. The more fancy ones that are not used much, you can look them up if needed. Okay, so moving on. So let me show you now. One more thing I want to show you. Even in a GET request, if you wish, you could send some pieces of information to the server. How do you send parameters to the server in a GET request? It is through the query string. We call it a query string. So you come to the URL, you put a question mark, and then you help yourself. You put name equal value, ampersand name equal value, and you can put as many parameters as you wish. Because the GET request does not have a body. So your only chance to send parameters in the GET request is in the URL. Yes? It could be either part of the URL, remember as we saw before, it could be part of the URL, such as, for example, /jobs/1. It will return you job number 1. Or it could be part of the query string. And usually, when we do Web API, we usually use query strings for optional parameters. For example, you want to get the movies. By default, it will give you all movies. But optionally, you can specify, give me all the movies with category comedy or category action, something like that. So this category is optional. So one way to pass this is to use the question mark. And usually the parameters we use in the URL itself are usually mandatory. They are not optional. Yep. Okay. Now for post requests, we will use a post verb followed by the URL. And then we pass the data we want to send to the server, we put it in the body of the request. So one way to format the body, the old web, we don't use this anymore, especially in our course. Some people are still using. One way to format what gets sent to the server is by doing name. You see here name equal value, ampersand name equal value, ampersand name equal value. Yeah. This way of doing it, the format, this is a standard format, and this is the name of this format. Form URL encoded. But in our case, in this course, how are we sending data to the server on a post request? What type of format are we using? JSON. So basically we cross this one, and what it will be the data type we send it to the server? JSON. How do we tell the server the data type of the body of the request? How do we tell the server the data type of the body of the request?
The type of
by adding this header. We call this a header called content type. This is one of the very important headers. You cannot say, I don't know, or let me look up Google. This one is a must-know header as developer. Yes? So what is this header? What is the role of this header? It defines the type in the body, the data type in the body. Okay? The data type in the body, either in the request or the response. So if you are sending something to the server, you could say to the server, oh, by the way, you will find something in the body. What's the data type? Application/JSON. Now, these data types are standardized. Let me show you. This content type, there is a standard called MIME types that defines all possible standards. But these are the most common ones. You see here, for example, if you are sending or receiving a JSON data, what will be the content type? Application/JSON. Why do we have this application/JSON? So the first part is it's kind of a type / subtype. It becomes clear here, look at this. All these are text. But in here I'm saying text/XML. This is the type, this is the subtype. This is text/HTML, text/plain text. So what I mean here, if the client or the server are sending some messages to each other in the body of the request, it's nice, it's very highly recommended, and sometimes it's a must to include this header called content type. And what are the possible values of this header? These are the possible values. There are other possible values, but these are the most common ones. Yes, please.
Why application? Why not text like the others?
Very good. Why is the fa'il always marfu'? Why do we put the verb always with dhamma at the end and the maf'ul bih with the fatha at the end? That's the rules. The ancestors, they decided this and khalas. So what I mean, those are standards. People have agreed on them, they published them, agreed upon, khalas. Like, we cannot change this. If you are sending JSON, what will be the content type? Application/JSON. That's it. The web, millions and billions of applications using this. Can we change this? No, too late. Khalas. We do it we can put our innovation, our contribution in something else. This one, khalas, already decided, and it is standard. When I say standard, agreed upon, browser developers, server developers, they already implemented it this way. Whenever the browser says content type HTML, it says, oh, you are sending me HTML, I will use my HTML parser to build the DOM and display it as HTML. If you're sending me JSON, oh, I should get ready and parse it as a JSON document. So this content type is so important header that we have to have. Either the client is sending to the server or the server is sending to the client, they need to put the content type. And the content type is standardized. Of course, you can have your own custom types, by the way, but these are the standard ones. If you are building your application in a closed environment, you can have your own types. It's up to you. If you are building it for the web, you must comply with the standards. Otherwise, the other people will not understand what you're talking about. Yes? Okay, moving on. Now the server, as I explained, the server responds with the status code and some headers plus the response body. Now the status codes, what are the codes that are out there? What are the possible codes? You don't need to memorize all of them, but as developer, you must be familiar with the most common ones. Okay? First of all, luckily, the way they have designed it, they designed it very nicely to make it easy for us as developers to recognize these codes. So when you see any code coming back from the server, starts with 2, put the smiley face and be happy, the request has been successful. What are the most 2 common status codes that starts with 2? 200 OK and 201 created. These are very common. We should be familiar with them. Now, sometimes you ask for a URL, but this URL has moved somewhere else. Or maybe the server is under maintenance and temporarily it wants to redirect you somewhere else. So it will not send you 200 OK. It will send you some other code, such as 302 found. It will tell you, I found it but this is the location where I found it. What I mean is, let me give you an example here. Let's imagine our QU website was hosted locally in my laptop on this address, and now it's no longer hosted. Now what I can do, if you come to localhost 800/QU, one way I can tell you 404 not found. It's like the shop has moved, you come to the neighbor, you ask, say, no, I don't know. But if they might be nice neighbor, they will say, okay, no problem, I will not tell to you 404 not found. Instead, what I will tell you, 301 moved permanently. Don't come back, moved permanently. And with this 301, what the server will also send? This header here, the location. And what the browser will do? Redirect. Many times it happens, but we don't notice it. Sometimes we visit some URLs and we see that the address has changed and the browser has made another request. It's because of this. Because the original server say, oh, we are no longer here. How the server says this to the client? 301, status code 301 moved permanently. And with the status code 301, what the server should send? Another header called location. Is clear? Remember this location, another use case where you use this location, if you remember, we've seen it. If you create a resource successfully, which code should you return? 200 OK, 201 created. And the new resource is created in another location. For example, if you created a new job, the job ID, let's say, becomes 123. So the location of this new job will be /jobs/123. So we send 201, and we send the location of the new resource for those who want to do ليطمئن قلبي. So you can go there if you want to check or if you want to verify. You see here the power of this protocol. Simple mechanisms, but very powerful. It handles very realistic and very powerful problems, very powerful use cases. Is clear? 301. So lastly, one more minute, I'll let you go. Now, if you see status code starting with 4 or 5, then unfortunately it's a sad face. Now, who to blame? 4, the client to blame. 5, the server to blame. Yeah? So for example, 404, you're asking for some resource that does not exist. Is the client to blame? What's the status code? 404, not found. If you send a request with the wrong parameters, with the expected request is not the same as you are sending, you will get 400 bad requests. Or you will get 401 unauthorized. You are trying to access something you don't have access to. You are not authorized to access, you get 401 unauthorized. Now, if something goes bad on the server side, you get 5 codes with 5. Let's say, for example, 500 internal error, very famous, 500 internal error, or 503 service unavailable. It may be down for maintenance or for some other reason. Okay, I think that's it. I hope it's a little bit more details, but these are very important. We need to be familiar with them as a web developers. And I'm sure you have seen this. It's these surfaces in the programming API. So when you are returning, for example, you do res.status201.send. Now, hopefully, you understand much more now. Why are you doing that? Okay, you are helping Express library to generate the HTTP response, and it will add the header. The status code, the status line will be based on the status number that you put in your API when you call the res.status. So I hope you get the idea. So the most important thing to keep in mind as developers, be familiar with the status codes, be familiar with this header content type, and be familiar with the most common content types. and of course be familiar with the whole HTTP concepts.